afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming for the third session of the day. Urban life reimagining is about how we design for people. Why we are not thinking about urban environments as the end goal, but how and about the human experience of living in an habitat that we design. This is about all of the complex energy layers that take into account in the design of the habitats and the territories. This session will help us to discover design initiatives and design thinking processes to regenerate our living spaces. I'm honored today to introduce to you our three speakers. Tuba, sorry for the pronunciation, Tuba Kocaturk. She came from a very long way. She came from Australia, from the School of Architecture and Built Environment at the Deakin University. Tuba is professor of integral design. I really like that term, integral design, and the founding director of the MIND. MIND means Mediated Intelligence in Design Lab. It's a transdisciplinary and practice-based research group that operate at the intersection of the built environment, the information technology, and design innovation. Her expertise centers upon the creative, generative, and collaborative use of information. Our next speaker's name is Cristiano. Cristiano Ceccato is Associate Director at Zaha Hadid Architects. His work entails a range of management design, technology leadership responsibilities, leading real large-scale private and public projects. His professional focus includes technical team management, design and development of building infrastructure systems, including geometric and computational rationalization. He is also keen in business development through integrated projects and associate to the digital practice methodology across the firm. He will be basically sharing with us today some of his major projects based on the framework on airports, but we will be probably going a little bit beyond. Finally, Caroline Naphegyi. She's the program director of the Lille Metropole 2020. It's a program called the World Design Capital. You will discover that with Caroline. Previously, in her role, Caroline was the director of Lille Design. It's a platform that encourages the use of design by public and private stakeholders to foster the economic development that support designers, the design of public policies, and social innovation through design. But previously, she also works with David Edwards. For some of you who know David, the founder of the laboratory in Paris, a place dedicated to the development of research protocols associating creators and the scientists. She also, and this is quite important, and we will discover that during the conversation, the Tomorrowland, I really like the name. It's a project management toolbox at the crossroad of discipline of design for change, an international design competition that puts innovative solutions, at the service of the public actors into practice, into action. Very important. So please welcome on stage Tuba, Caroline, and Cristiano. So before we really get and make a deep dive to this session, can you please introduce yourself? You know, we were talking about that, about a personal little story or something that will help the audience to understand how do you connect with this very important topic of reimagining urban spaces. Cristiano.
Well, I get the pleasure to start, so thank you for having me here, and it's a really amazing event, so merci beaucoup. I myself, I suppose I'm a product of a kind of interconnected urbanism because I was born in Milano, but I grew up everywhere else because that's the way that life unfolded on both sides of the Atlantic, and I've lived on many different continents. So that kind of idea of urbanity that is also global and interconnected and therefore helps communicate, people communicate across regions, is something that I'm actually kind of a part of.
Very good. And you, Tuba, what connects you to the session?
I guess I'm one of the few academics here. And I think I'm representing a different model of academic, which has emerged after the collapse of the ivory tower. Much of the work we do is really in connection with industry. Our problems come from industry, and we reformulate questions and problems together with industry. And I think that's the connection. Yeah.
Very good. And you, Caroline?
Again, thank you for inviting me here. So my connection is more based on the experiments we are trying to settle on a territory and how these experiments can help us formalize models or something that can be modelized and exported elsewhere.
Thank you. Well, Caroline, I may start with you, because we have a very nice session, and each of you have this perspective to share. So I will start with this question for you. This experience, like setting up this program called the World Design Capital for Lille, is quite unique in the way you engage design into reinventing territories, cities, starting with what design does, the usage. Well, I will be very pleased, and I'm sure the audience would be, to discover a little bit what it is all about.
Okay, so to start with, the World Design Capital is a label owned by the WDO. WDO was the former International Council of Societies and Industrial Design. And when Luisa Bocchietto became the president in 2017, they've changed the name from ICSID to WDO, World Design Organization. And it was really for us a sign of the openness of design, the way design has to contribute to a better world, which is what they are trying to do. So we will be the World Design Capital in 2020, following the 7th previous capital. So you can see it's quite a recent label. We were shortlisted together with Sydney, and Sydney had nothing to prove, and
quite a competitor.
Quite a competitor, and I think we finally won the bid because we had everything to prove. So our idea was to try to take the model of Decathlon, the company, who has completely changed their way of producing their own product 20 years ago. And they have started to integrate designers in the company. And instead of distributing products, they started to make their own products. And what we wanted to do is, as well as Decathlon, was to really integrate a design agency as part of a territory. But our territory is a 90 cities territory. It's not only a city. So we have proposed not to produce a program like expected in an event such as a World Design Capital, but more to build all together a collaborative process based on all the stakeholders of the territory. So we have a team of 15 people, but we are just orchestrating a process, a design process, in fact, design management process, in order to build that program. The process is based on a call for manifestation that takes the form of a POC, Let's POC Together, which is an invitation to the companies, the cities, the 90 cities, the universities. We have a very big partnership with all the universities and cultural institutions to think about innovative practices, something that has to be very different from what they already do, and to propose that project that would be driven by designers, because it's a world design capital, not a world project capital. So to take them into the process, we explain the advantage of a POC, which is an experimentation, that will be part of the program in 2020. To be part of this program, they have to find something very innovative, but they also have to prove that they have financially and technically the resources to make the project possible, because it's the base of the program. So we have settled a certain amount of tools, like the POC book or the POC ID. So the first stage is to identify the issue, to write the intention in a POC ID, and from that moment we will start a process of diagnosticism, integration of design and so on, to share the innovation in 2020 in order to be able to implement this innovation after 2020. That is really our goal. So for now, since 6 months ago, we have more or less identified 360 POCs, which means that at the end, we have to really deliver 50 exemplary POCs to prove that the process was right. From the POCs, the different POCs, we have identified themes: good health, collaborative cities, circular economy, public services, the future of housing, the game, which is coming from the POCs. And we will imagine like hubs in which we will demonstrate all the process of following these innovation with the integration of design and with all the tools we would have settled for that World Design Capital. And from the hubs, we will propose to the public, the audience coming from the citizens from the metropole, but also public coming from Hong Kong or all over the world, we will propose routes. So each visitor will understand the local innovation, taken into consideration the global innovation, and at the same time they will experiment on site the different POCs. So what we are trying to achieve on our side as an organizer is first to give an idea of what is design to all these stakeholders, but by learning by doing themselves. Because as a director of Lille Design, I can say that everybody is convinced by design, but nobody is integrating design. So it's a way to take them into the process. And the second goal for us is really to bring the proof of the use of design on a larger scale. Okay, thank you very much.
Actually, can we go back
Sure.
just one more? This is really very important, because you're talking about a program, but this program has a very important aim, is to make, visualize and acculturate very important actors in the redefinition and the reimagination of the cities, the design thinking, the design process, and the design effectuation of this process into a territory. I also recognize that it's intimately interdisciplinary. So it's probably what it is, right?
Definitely, because most of the previous World Design Capital have chosen one way to address design, like social innovation or public policy. Our choice was really to create a design-driven territory. So
it's very ambitious, but it's absolutely unique.
I think it's ambitious if you look at the large scale, but step by step, it's one POC after the other. It's one stakeholder and a group of people, and step by step, I think we educate, we accurate. So, we'll see in 2020 what will be the result, and then we will see if it's really ambitious.
We may come back to that.
Yeah.
So Tuba, this is perfect leading in this conversation because in your work about fusing, I don't know how it is said, but basically bring design and technology to transform our environment, there are something that you are always putting in the forefront is this notion of transdisciplinarity. So you are an academic, so that means that the thinking and the design thinking is at the heart of what you are basically doing. So can you tell us more? And more specifically, I know where we were discussing earlier, this notion of intelligent ecosystem.
So just to summarize what we do in MindLab, we are, as Anne mentioned, a practice-based and transdisciplinary group, and we focus on user-centered innovation in built environment with intelligent fusion of design and technology. Well, we specifically focus on the transformational impact of intelligent technologies such as AI, real-time connectivity, spatial computation, and we look at the transformational impact on how we design, how we conceive, how we engage with, and how we experience the built environment. Well, design and technology has always contributed to the changes and improvements in building environment, but it has been very limited so far, and the reason is our previous, earlier conception of the cities, the built environment, as complicated systems, as opposed to complex systems. So a complicated systems is based on a false premise, because it is based on the premise that we can actually divide our problems into manageable chunks, and we can each focus from our own disciplinary expertise and silos, and then we try to bring everything together with top-down and highly centralized planning and governance models. Well, we realize this model doesn't work. We have realized very recently that cities are complex ecosystems. So complex systems means they are composed of interconnected parts, and any change in one part of the system has a dramatic impact on other parts of the system. Well, this proposes a completely new value proposition, and it changes almost everything, our educational systems, how we produce knowledge, how we interact with one another. And the key here is not designing things or making things, but also making the connections, designing the connections between the things. So how does this understanding impact our work? So, we are missing a key slide here.
Do you find it further?
Maybe further. Yes. Okay, great. So this is a framework we have developed in MindLab. It actually helps us adapt this system perspective, and it helps us contextualize the work we do from this system perspective. So this is based on an intelligent urban ecosystem framework, and it's composed of 4 quadrants. Each quadrant represents how we can make real improvements through integration of design and technology. So we can improve the performance of our products and processes, and that's where our focus used to be in the past 20, 30 years. But there are other important actions we could take. We can now improve the user experience of the people. We can create new practices and policies and we can have more impact on the culture and society, and we can propose new services and businesses. So, but what is really key here, the challenge and the value lies in recognizing the interconnectedness between these quadrants, meaning the most useful knowledge actually resides at the intersection, and transformative change really happens when an innovation in one quadrant actually is diffused by the other quadrants. So how does this affect on the way we formulate our problems in our research group? So I'm going to give you 2 examples. So part of the work we do is very much in connection with the City Council. There's a big mandate now from the Australian government for the City Councils to develop climate change adaptation strategies. So we're working on a project to increase outdoor urban thermal comfort and transform the outdoor urban environments. But instead of jumping into the design, what we're trying to do is actually thinking, well, this is a very unsustainable model if you just jump into designing things and using technology. What we need to do is actually make sure that there's an informed consultation and informed understanding between the different stakeholders. So we have developed an immersive platform where different stakeholders, city council, policymakers, and community, different members of the community, could actually use this platform to communicate, to co-design, co-develop, and understand their different perspectives. And this actually makes the solution much better fit for purpose, but also the city council is going to adapt this in their future practices, which means policy implications at the same time. Another project we're developing is, this is very exciting, this is a work in progress. We are reimagining the public transportation, again working with a number of industries and the city council, and we're thinking, well, the public transportation is one of the most inefficient transportation systems almost globally, right? And it's based on a system which has remained unchanged for 200 years, based on a central model, has a fixed route, and it doesn't adapt to the changing dynamic effects that is happening in a city. So we said, what if we have adopted swarm behavior that we adapt from the nature and adapt it to a new kind of decentralized public transportation system which reacts, adapts, and responds to changing needs, changing traffic, changing weather, changing user needs. And at the same time, we are trying to model and simulate this. So what is interesting here is actually this is not an IT problem, although we use technology a lot. This is a complex design problem. And any change that we propose here is going to have impact on other parts of the system, such as carbon efficiencies. It's going to have an impact on the users, their habits, the governance models, and how this new system actually interacts with the other subsystems in the city. So this is one of the last slides. So we are increasingly dealing with an increased complexity and as designers, and we're not only designing things and signs or products, we're also designing interactions, we're designing systems. And as we move up the scale, we need evolution of our education, we need evolution of our practices and how we research, because we need to develop new knowledge bases to deal with this complexity. And this is maybe last token, what I believe is going to be what is really necessary, and the main value of design in this to deal with this complexity will be a new ability for designers to choreograph disciplines. And I'm not just randomly choosing the word choreograph. I think this is really key, to choreograph disciplines and knowledge sets to apply to problems to make real impact, systemic impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Tuba. This is great. It does also give us this very deep understanding of how does it proceed, and you're also getting some very physical project that just help us to understand this very complex practice to address very complex subject. But to continue in the conversation, because we may come back to this notion of evolution of the practice, how to address and tackle complex project. But now I'm going to turn to Cristiano. And Cristiano, you being in the world of a probably complicated project and now maybe moving to very complex project, since you've been in charge of airports like the Beijing airport, the Navy Mumbai airport, you also, we discussed together, being responsible for the train station, Lille train station, airport? Which one?
I commented on the Lille station. We can talk about that. I wasn't actually responsible for that because I was.
That was a very interesting discussion we had. That was the fact that as soon as you are basically looking at what is the node where we can get transportation happening, you basically are creating a completely new systemic regeneration of this urban space. So tell us a little bit more about what basically your practice and those projects talk to you about reinventing those urban space.
So as I mentioned before, I'm sort of a product of growing up in a way that is actually trans-urban, if you like. Mm-hmm. We talked about third culture kids and that kind of removal from a particular place. And in a way, the way we work now reflects that because we work worldwide. And so it's interesting that to have Caroline here, because what we talked about Lille, what is happening in Lille now is also in part, I think, sustained by the fact that it's now a major transport node across Europe that brings people there and actually provides you access to the kind of public that you will need. Brexit notwithstanding, whatever it's going to happen now with that thing. But people migrate and they flow through that, through a central piece of urbanism that is Lille, and you can now capitalize on that and use that to develop your, shall we say, your vision now for 2020. So in our case, what I wanted to do really is talk about, as an example, just really mention two projects that my team and I have been working on, which have to do with communication. They have to do with communicating, first of all, allowing people in different places to communicate across locales, and also then the idea of communicating information that allows these objects to be created. So I'm talking about construction. So communication needs to happen for the communication to happen in a certain way. We need to communicate design information so we can get it built, people can use it, and can then communicate in their lives by moving around. So,
actually, this is a great metaphor because you are bridging through communication through a bridge.
Absolutely. And here we're bridging literally with a bridge, and then we'll look at what happens when you bridge with,
exactly.
with flying. But in this particular case, I also wanted to talk about how do you communicate a vision. So this is a new bridge in Taiwan. We just started construction on this, the Danjiang Bridge. It's the world's longest single-mast asymmetrical cable-stay bridge. That means instead of having two masts, it has only one. Very complex design in a high seismic zone, so I won't really go too much into that. But what is really important about it is the fact that it actually has a poetic background. One of the things that was really, really important to the people who were bidding this project and who were asking for proposals was the idea of framing a site, framing a sunset in this case, which is a very important thing for the residents of Taiwan. How do you design something that does not interfere with that but helps you frame that? So suddenly we're talking about a bridge that sort of dances with the sun and collaborates with that space. And before you even get to a level of technology, you have to think about what am I actually going to design that captures, if you like, a cultural context that is very important. Because when we work around the world, we have to first and foremost solve human problems of intercultural communications. And I'll touch on that again. Then you get to the actual technical aspect of communicating what we call constructability. So how do you take a complex design, turn it into something that you can build at a certain cost? How do you develop the information all the way to the point that you can communicate certainty of a design to whoever is the stakeholder so that you can build and actually erect a project like this having full information that again builds trust between the designer of what you're proposing and what you can actually do. In this case, this was modeled all the way down to rebar and rebar ties with our Taiwanese partners. So every single piece of rebar that is getting built in this project is actually been modeled and quantified within a 3D model. That means it has an actual proper solid, so you can quantify its volume, its tonnage, and you get real accurate information. That proves a high level of certainty in the clients that you have, particularly in a public project such as this one. So there is communication of information that is necessary to then help create a communication infrastructure for people at an urban scale, right? Which is what we're talking about here.
Just to interrupt, what is the scale of that particular image?
So what you're talking about, the scale of the model, how many petabytes of stuff?
Is it something micro? Or?
Well, no. I mean, here it goes into the atomic. What that means is that every piece of information you see on the screen is a unitary atomic piece. You don't say there's this much percentage of rebar, which is what you do in the early design stages. If this rebar isn't in the design, it's not getting made. And that's the way that Boeing works, that's the way that Airbus works, and it gives you the most fine-grained level of information management that you can have. Right? This is really important for managing cost and also for working with a contractor. There's a whole contractor story around this. I won't bore you with it today because we don't have time. The other project that I'll quickly touch on is this one. This is the Beijing Daxing International Airport. We are just about to open this in the next few months. It's a new airport in Beijing, China. It's a second airport. So if you were in Milano, you imagine they have Linate. This is the Malpensa Greenfield Airport. If you are in Paris, you have Orly. This would be the Charles de Gaulle, and so on and so on. It's the second greenfield airport to the south. And when this will open, it will be along with Istanbul, I don't know which place is bigger, the two largest single-volume terminal buildings in the world. So this is just under 800,000 square meters of airport that we've been working on since 2011. But what's really important about this is you don't talk anymore about train station. You don't talk anymore about airport. You talk about intermodal transport hubs. What client wants are intermodal transport hubs, which means that you have a hub that connects not just people transferring or flying, but it connects the city. So it becomes a transfer station. Underneath this airport, we have a railway station which is the size of Paddington. We have 14 railway lines under the same airport as part of the same project. So some people will change trains here without even flying. It interconnects a region, which is now the Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei regions, all interconnected into a single new node, that just to the north and east of it creates a new special economic zone that the Chinese government has created, purely fueled by the connectivity of this piece of infrastructure. So suddenly you're implanting a node that creates something that can communicate. That was not there before, right? So ultimately you look at, okay, so what does this really mean when you have a multimodal transport hub? You have an air terminal, you have roadway, because we have two different new highways that were getting built there at the same time, and you have a railway station. So the multimodal transport hub also has an airport city around it of offices, and that space, if you like, now becomes the intersection of all these different elements. And that is really where people invest in today, because it's no longer about the mode of transport, it's about helping people be communicated, be integrated, and choose whichever the method is that they want to travel by. So when you look at something like this and you take the wrappers off, it looks like that. And basically you see to the bottom right, you can see through all the way down to the railway station, you can see the different levels of access. One thing that I'll point out about what's innovative about this project, and I think most people here use airports, so you know what I'm talking about. In most airports you have a departure level and you have an arrivals level. And the departure level is above, the arrivals is below. In this airport we have a third level in between, and that is a fully automated self-processing level with no human counters. They assume now, because China is the most interconnected, telephone-connected, smartphone-connected place on Earth by per capita, that everybody now has their boarding pass, which didn't exist 10 years ago, on their phone, so they can come with their boarding pass and just let themselves directly through to a domestic flight, directly on the same level. So you don't even change levels, you just walk straight through. That's been built as a full separate level in this airport. So there is a trust in technological evolution that now actually gets built into concrete and actually executed as a piece of infrastructure. So when I talk about communication, just briefly, it's also about communication with the people you work with stakeholders, with design teams, across cultural barriers. What you can see here is a lot of design sessions 24 hours a day between London, Paris, and Beijing, working across cultural divides, working across political divides, and building trust, building communications with your clients that they're going to allow you to do something like this. And that goes all the way to the top, because the ultimate decision maker on this project was this gentleman who will open the airport. We had to build trust that we as a foreign team could actually deliver a project like this in collaboration with our Chinese partners on time and within the framework of what they needed. So this is something that's quite complicated when we're operating globally. How do you communicate and build that kind of level of dialogue between different parties? And that happens, of course, through the integration of information. So all of this is integrated into a single data framework, which contains the entire model, which we developed initially, was then handed over as a digital model to our Chinese partners who developed it further. That level of information, much like the project in Taiwan, becomes something that is then used to, right down to the level of every bracket, every component, quantify and describe every single element of what I'm going to build in this airport. Again, building that certainty of what it is I'm going to execute. So out of the clouds, then the airport begins to emerge and is now basically complete exterior. We're just finishing the interiors now. And you know, this space above here that you see, there's a little dome in the middle, little glass dome, that is 90 meters across. The whole airport is 1,500 meters tip to tip on the star. Makes it very efficient to park aircraft without the need of a little train, which makes it very sustainable because I don't need to manage that. So it's a very human scale airport, even though it's very, very large, and we have something like 78 contact stands. So this is standing on top of that dome. This is what it looks like inside while we were building this as a giant space frame that allows us to have complete flexibility. So when we talk about sustainability is, what is the lifespan of this building? Things keep on changing inside. How you have shopping, how you have processing, how you have security. This airport will have a lifespan of 60, 80 years. We cannot predict what's going to happen. So the solution to this is to have a series of mega columns, and the rest is column-free space. So all these buildings underneath, which are in this case retail shopping, can all be moved around. Over the next decades, you can move this stuff around. It will not affect the character of the building. It will not affect the spatial quality of the building, and it will not affect the envelope. So that makes it a very flexible, very reconfigurable airport. So this is with the things with the cladding going on. So this is about inside about 35 meters high. So this is with it coming together. You see here, this is what that central dome looks like now. So this is basically now complete. This is looking back to the land side. So this will become the hub for SkyTeam. So those of you people who fly Alitalia of Air France, we will be coming in here into Beijing, and hope this will open by September, October of this year. You'll be able to fly. We now have officially an IATA code, just like you have LINAT is LIN. This is PKX. So next time you want to fly to Beijing, make sure you fly to PKX. Okay? Merci.
Thank you, Cristiano. This has been amazing. I may challenge you slightly a little bit. From the previous conversation we had with Tuba and Caroline, they were intensively talking about the importance of maintaining this transdisciplinarity to protect on the human experience. Because design is really focused on human. What specifically do you do in your practice in Zaha Hadid beyond to secure the trust on the build? How do you secure the experience, the human experience that will be just, I mean, you touched on it at the very end by proposing some kind of a modular approach, this upper, dome, where allow you to actually redefine the experience over time through probably the learning, the usage of the. But how do you specifically do that in your practice?
So if you take a project like this one, I don't know if we go
you may
forward
go
or
back, maybe. I don't
try,
know.
je ne sais pas.
Yeah.
Voilà.
Voilà, peut-être.
Encore.
Voilà. Yes.
Je fais encore. Voilà, encore une fois. Okay. When you go in an airport, what most people nowadays don't know, that it's a kind of a cynical proposition. But today, what people developing transport infrastructure really want, say on an airport like this, is they want a shopping mall, and you stick gates on it, and you have a baggage system underneath. That's all people really want now. So, more
when you
than
say people, you say
the
customers.
developers. No, I'm talking about the people who own and operate and develop
Voilà.
the airport, the
Not
stakeholders.
the people who will be traveling in that.
Correct. So the question is, when you know nowadays more than 50% of the income has to come from concessions, retail, advertising, this kind of a space, you have to entice people to actually make use of it. So designing the experience while understanding all the technical, legal, and also security stakeholders that are playing a part in this and making them as invisible as possible. That is really the key to success, or is kind of the holy grail, because nowadays, if you're only landing planes, that is not going to suffice. People actually use the airport as a destination. The best example is Singapore, which every year, it's not architecturally, if you like, doing quite complex architecture, but there's a feeling about the place. There's a quality of the space. There's a scale of human presence in that airport that makes it a destination for people who live in Singapore. They go there and they have dinner in the airport just because it's a destination in its own right. That is a successful model that we want to emulate. So designing that experience and making people feel comfortable, making people feel that they are not intimidated or nervous about going to the airport. So what kind of colors do you have? What kind of acoustics do you have? What kind of visibility of where you're going do you have? That becomes really, really important to make people feel comfortable and therefore be more relaxed to perhaps partake in a commercial experience.
So we're almost at the end of the session, but Caroline, I just have a very quick question and then a last one for you, Tuba. Looking at what Cristiano is doing is very intense. What do you think will be the particular exceptional differentiator that design can provide when designing as a complexity, considering the complexity of doing an airport? what do you think is going to be really the particularity or singularity in doing it by putting the design process up front?
I think it's what we are trying to experiment. It's to involve the user much ahead of the process. And the POC, by the proof of concept,
Yes.
by definition, is an experimentation integrating the user. But what will be different, I think, in the Metropole from now to the future is that the stakeholders are taking, through that experience, taking the habit to think about the designers not on the product, but much more ahead.
We call it upstream.
Absolutely, upstream. And to, through the participation of the designers, to involve the user. And it's exactly what I was telling you about Rami Fischler experience about Réinventer Paris. Because Réinventer Paris was addressed...
That is the head of the laboratory of usage?
The user laboratory aim is to reintegrate the future user into the process of building Paris. Because he's very little compared to those architects and finances and business at the end of that.
This is really a question of size. It's a very almost uncanny to imagine just one single designer against all of those machines that are building complexity.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes we must consider how designers can just even do that.
They orchestrate. They are in the center. They make it possible to work all together.
Choreography.
Yeah, and it's choreography, and it's a way to take into consideration the whole project as a globality, not step by step.
One last question for you, Tuba. You're an academic. You are facing young students, coming to learn how to design in complexity. What kind of advice? I mean, there may be some designers, architects here also in the audience, to actually address your career in that, world of complexity.
Yeah, it's a deep and difficult question, but if I may try to answer, I think one of the key things is really when we start designing from a product-focused perspective towards a system, perspective, we cannot keep defining our problems in the same way. We have to reframe our problems. A design or a solution is only as good as the problem it responds to. So this is what I keep telling also in the design studios. And I think reframing problems is really key to transdisciplinarity, because if you frame a problem from my own disciplinary perspective, it doesn't matter how many different disciplinary collaboration I'm going to make, I'm still operating within that limited area. So transdisciplinary starts in the formulation of the problem. Problems do not know disciplines. And I think it's already emerging, like you were referring to intermodal transportation hub, that's a new reframing of airports. So that would be my main advice.
But sometimes people think complexity is just an expansion when it's a reframe.
Absolutely.
That means like you have to design the question.
Absolutely.
It's a completely different paradigm, I would say.
Yeah.
Any question from the room? I mean, I know we probably passed our time, but any burning or any question anyone would like to ask to our speakers? Well, obviously, that may conclude our session. Thank you, Cristiano, Tuba, Caroline. Thank you very much for your...
Thank you, Anne.